Welcome to the Idaho Falls Rotary Club via the Idaho Falls Community Luncheon. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Michael Blennis and the president of the Idaho Falls Rotary Club. At the beginning of today's meeting, I've got a little bit of club announcements for all of you club members out there. For the rest, if you just please bear with me for a minute or two. The Idaho Falls Rotary Club has sent out a survey to all of our members about your thoughts and feelings in terms of resuming in-person meetings. This survey is going to provide important information for us for our planning and how we're going to move forward this summer. So please take the time to complete the survey so that we have your input for our upcoming board meeting. We want to keep everybody healthy and safe as we try to get back to what's our new next in Rotary. The other issue or club business that I want to talk about is our meeting next week. We had hoped that we'd be going back to in-person meetings next week, but we're going to be doing another online meeting. So please pay attention to your email with some further details as those become available. And the last piece of our club business is I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming duck race that we have this summer. Our duck race committee continues to work and move forward with the planning for the race. The sponsors have been amazing in terms of their stepping up to the plate and helping us out in this unique year that we're having. I want you to know that we've added a new committee to the duck race. That committee is going to be over health and safety, and they're going to be the ones that are monitoring what's going on with the COVID-19 situation here in our community and advising the duck race committee on those events around the duck race. I do want to assure everyone the ducks will swim. We can dump the ducks and they can go down over the falls with almost no human involvement. And so the only thing that we're working on is what events are going to be appropriate given our community situation. And as we know, that's a very fluid situation. And so this Health and Safety Committee will make sure that we can do it and have a great event for our community and that we can keep everybody in the community and our club healthy and safe. Our program today is one that I'm particularly excited about because it involves one of the 6 areas of focus of Rotary. Our 6 areas of focus are peace and conflict resolution, disease prevention and treatment, maternal and child health, economic and community development, which is where our duck race proceeds get used. But for today's program, we're going to be talking about education and literacy. It was actually a job in education that brought me to Idaho back in the early 80s. I was employed by District 91, and that led me to a career at Development Workshop. Both positions focused on helping people develop skills, helping our community value everyone for their abilities and their contributions. Dana will introduce our scholarship program that we're also going to be showing you a video of our scholarship winners. This is something that all of our club members contribute to throughout the year, and it has allowed us this year to award 6 scholarships. So at this point, I'm going to introduce Dana, and she'll come in and introduce our scholarship winners for the year. So Dana?
Thank you, Mike. As Mike mentioned, we were pleased to be able to award 6 scholarships to 6 students for $1,000 each, like we do every year. But because of the COVID situation, as we know, we weren't able to hold our regular scholarship award luncheon where we recognized and got to meet the students. So one of the members of my committee is Carrie Hammond, and she has put together an excellent video that will highlight and allow us to be introduced to the students and see some of what their application consisted of and what people have said about the students that received the scholarships. So I thank Carrie for her work and effort in putting this video together, and we will now view that for about 5 minutes before moving on with our program. Wonderful. Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, IE Productions, and congratulations to the students that received our scholarship this year. In their application, applicants are required to detail their education and career goals, provide a description of community service they have participated in, and include a statement contemplating how the Rotary four-way test relates to their experiences and our society. Each recipient today stood out for their personal qualities, and they demonstrated that they not only understand the Rotary four-way test, but they are already striving to live it and be an example to others in the process. So keeping with our theme of education, I'm excited to announce our program today, featuring District 91 Superintendent George Boland and District 93 Superintendent Scott Wolstenhume. Margaret Wimborne, the Director of Communications and Community Engagement for District 91, will be our moderator today. I will turn the podium over to her for the remainder of our program. Margaret?
I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and moderate this discussion about education. It's a subject that's near and dear to my heart. As Dana said, we have Superintendent Boland and Superintendent Wolstenhume with us today. They're going to talk a little bit about the lessons learned from the unprecedented school closures this spring, and also talk about some of the challenges that our schools continue to face and how they are planning for the fall. Most of our Rotarians know Superintendent Boland. He's an Idaho Falls native and a graduate of Skyline High School. He received degrees from Montana State University, the University of Oregon, and University of Idaho. He began his career in education in 1979 as a teacher and a certified athletic director up in Billings, Montana. He returned to Idaho Falls in 1991 as assistant principal at Idaho Falls High School. He served as the principal of Skyline High School for 7 years and as an assistant superintendent for 4 years before being named the superintendent of District 91 in 2006. Superintendent Wolstenhume is also a native of Eastern Idaho. He grew up in the Teton Valley and graduated from Teton High School. He served a religious mission to Japan before attending university at BYU in Idaho, in Provo. After college, his first job in education was at Shelley High School, where he taught for 5 years. He joined the Bonneville School District in 2004, where he's worked in a number of different positions, including a principal of Cloverdale Elementary School, an assistant principal at Hillcrest High School, district school improvement coordinator, director of assessment, director of technology, director of human resources, and assistant superintendent before being named superintendent just last spring. So we appreciate them being with us today. As we get started, I'm going to ask George and Scott to reflect a little bit about the last few months of this last school year. And if you could tell us a little bit about some of the lessons that were learned from those experiences, things that worked well, things that you wish you would have done a little bit differently. And I'm going to ask Scott to start with this question.
Thank you. And it's been an interesting few months for sure, and certainly unprecedented in any time in my experience in education, and I think just completely unprecedented in the history of American education, that we had school closures at the national level, at the state level, and at the district level. And so not something that we were anticipating, and yet I really am very proud of the work that our teachers did, that our families did, and that our students did to make the very best of a really challenging situation. And if I were to say what I think probably the number one lesson I learned through this is that classroom instruction really matters, that the very best learning environment we have for our kids is truly in the classroom with a highly effective teacher, providing that intervention and support, building relationships with kids, and just doing all of the literally thousands of things that they do on a daily basis to make instruction and learning work. Interestingly, I received my doctorate degree in education technology, which has been useful, but really, even going through that program, what I learned the most is that nothing trumps a highly effective teacher in the classroom working with his or her students. And so that's certainly the most important lesson we learned. That's been the basis of our plan as we look at reopening schools this fall, is how do we get back to that situation where we can have highly effective teachers working with our kids in the classroom. There's certainly some challenges that we met along the way, and things that I think if we were reflecting back, and if we find ourselves in that same situation again, that we'll do a few things differently. But all in all, just really pleased with the effort that our teachers and our families and our kids put forth.
Great. Thank you, Scott. George, what about in District 91?
Well, March 16th will be burned in my brain for the rest of my life. That was the Sunday that we had the statewide conference call with Governor Little. We came back to school on Monday, and then the president made an announcement with regard to COVID and an approach to that. And the next day we were closed. So it happened very, very quickly. I think one of our lessons is that we have to be adaptable and be able to incorporate lots of different situations into how we deal with students. And I would echo Scott's comments in terms of, if anything, it really emphasized the importance of that relationship between teachers and students, that really is the nexus and essential to learning. I think the other thing that it pointed out is really those practices, what we would refer to as best practices, and the importance of figuring out how to deploy those in a variety of different manners and situations. And I think the other thing that we learned was there was an awful lot we don't know and actually have trouble getting in terms of different student situations with respect to their access to different resources. So it was initially, probably for the first month, a period of triage, which in hindsight is probably the easy part. And now as we look going forward, it's kind of taking some of what we know worked and emphasizing that and abandoning some practices that we know that were not very effective.
Great, thank you. So George, how are you preparing for the fall? What are some of the decision metrics that your school district is looking at as we contemplate the idea of bringing students back to school?
We're trying to plan with a high level of uncertainty, which is a real challenge. So we have a number of committees put together based on different grade levels to look at how we can kind of up our game with respect to incorporating the whole remote aspect into a face-to-face aspect. So, there are a number of different scenarios that we could face in August. We might have a full return with an emphasis on taking precautions to try and minimize the risk to students and staff with regard to infection. There's a scenario potentially where we could start remote and then go back to face-to-face, or start face-to-face and then end up going remote, or it could be some combination. And that's really what we're trying to focus on, is making sure that we're in a position that we can be nimble. So regardless of the environment that we find ourselves in over the course of the year, because it probably will be something more than just what happens in August or September. It's really looking at the full year. The probability that we're going to return to what we consider to be normal over the course of the next year, I think, is pretty small. So making sure that we're addressing some of the key issues, connectivity, student access to devices, and trying to educate parents as well as teachers in terms of how to engage in those best practices and be flexible going forward. Those are some of the things that we're focusing on over the summer.
And Scott, what about in District 93? How are you preparing for the fall?
So right now we're working on our plan to reopen schools as normally as we possibly can in the fall. Our rationale for that is we started with a parent survey about 6 weeks ago, and overwhelmingly the parents told us that they were ready and wanted their kids back in school. And so we took that information and we've now balanced that against guidance that we have from the Center for Disease Control. As we've reviewed their suggestions for schools, there's nothing in their guidance right now that makes it feel like we cannot open school in the fall. We don't have anything from Idaho Department of Health and Welfare or Eastern Idaho Public Health that are telling us we can't. And so our first and top priority is working on a plan that we can bring kids back into school in the fall with the appropriate precautions that we need to put in place. And there's of course a lot of aspects to that, whether it's in the cafeteria, whether it's on school buses or in the classroom. How do we create as much physical distancing as we can? How do we put in measures to make sure that students are safe? How do we plan for the eventuality that either a student or a staff member will contract this particular disease, and what's our communication plan when that happens? So that's really what we're primarily focused on. We also, within that overall plan, we have a plan B, which, like George talked about, would be some type of blended model where students would be likely coming to school for a couple of days a week and then learning at home for a couple of days a week. And then our plan C, which is the one that we really hope we don't have to implement again, is really a repeat of what happened this spring with students learning at home. So we're prioritizing in that order and really focused right now on that plan A, and then we'll keep working on plan B and plan C in case those are models we have to implement later.
Okay. Scott, how would you say, from your survey, how do you think parents are feeling about coming back to school in the fall?
Yeah, so in that survey, and again, this happened probably about the 1st of May is when we sent that out to our parents, and they were certainly ready to send their kids back to school. And we kind of had a tiered response to a question for parents asking if the situation stays the same, sorry, let me rephrase that. So the question was, are you ready to send your kids back to school? The first question was, even if the situation gets worse, are you ready to send your kids back? And then if the situation stays the same, and the third level was if we can bring kids back with appropriate precautions. And we had over 90% of our parents that fell into one of those three categories. And I was actually surprised at how many said, we don't care even if it gets worse, we want our kids back in school. And so I'm not quite sure how my wife responded to that question with our kids at home. She might have been in that category. So I think parents, overall, the sense that I have is people have gotten more used to the fact that this disease is there. They're starting to, in their personal lives, incorporate a certain amount of personal risk and saying, I can live with the risk that's out there, and whether that comes to decisions about going out to restaurants or wearing masks in public. But I think we're all just kind of getting used to living with this, and people are ready for lives to get back to as normal as we can. So that was the key information that we used. But we are also very cognizant of the fact that we do have families that are not ready to send their kids back, some that just don't feel safe, and some that actually really enjoyed the online learning experience with their kids this spring. And so with that, we're fortunate that we have online schools. We have both an online elementary school and an online high school. And we've had at the elementary level about 100 students that have switched enrollment from a traditional school to the online school, so we can provide that accommodation. And then again, we're looking at a plan to say, for those people that are still on the fence, how can we deliver some type of blended approach to help support kids to best meet their needs?
Great. And George, what about in District 93? What's your sense of how parents are feeling about the fall?
Our survey went out last week, and I think to date we've got about 2,600 responses, and it will close this Friday. So we're still in the process of gathering information, but based on the preliminary information that we have, like District 93, District 91 would anticipate that the majority of students would be returning in the fall, provided that conditions are such that we can do so. As Scott said, parents are ready to have their kids back in school for lots of different reasons. We have, so many kids that come from such different backgrounds and environments that parents are, anxious to have their kids back in school for a variety of reasons. And that would be the majority based on the preliminary information. We do have some that have kind of indicated that that's conditional based upon our ability or their perception of our ability to provide safeguards to minimize risk. And then some of it is, what are the conditions going to be like at any given point in time that their decision might be based upon the conditions when school starts. We also have some parents that have indicated that they don't anticipate that their kids would return to school. And in some cases, it's until there's a vaccine. So we are looking at putting together an online option for those folks so that if they're not comfortable with their children returning to school, that we have something that we can provide them with at home to meet the needs that they have based upon the grade levels of their children.
Okay. Based on our conversation, it sounds like there is a possibility that we could see some form of hybrid instruction with a mix of students being in school part of the time and being at home part of the time. Can you give us a sense, George, of what that might look like?
Again, based on the preliminary survey results that we have, the preference of a number of different options is that students would come kind of on an A-B day scenario. So a group of kids might be there on Monday and Wednesday, another group of kids there on Tuesday and Thursday, and then Friday would be kind of a staff development day, and all students would be home. And so that's where the hybrid piece comes in, so that the days that the kids are not physically present at school, they're still engaged in learning, hopefully. There's just lots and lots of layers. Scott referred to some of those in terms of the issues with transportation and food service, so on and so forth. So, we're still kind of ferreting out all of the details associated with that, but that's kind of the, if we're looking at a red, yellow, green type scenario, red being we can't come back to school, yellow being it's on an intermittent basis. That's kind of what we're planning for in terms of that yellow or that caution area, and then trying to figure out how to do that. Just an example of the complexities of that. We have a number of families that have kids at all 3 grade levels, and so to try and coordinate that so that you have a situation where families have all of their kids in school on the same days and home on the same days is a real challenge when you factor in the transportation issues associated with that as well. So it's one of those things that this last spring was kind of the triage. We did what we could do in the time that we had. People were fairly accepting of that. Now we're getting into things a little bit deeper, and so we have a better understanding of some of the challenges that we'll face. So incorporating the whole online piece or the remote piece into instruction on a regular basis is something that we'll try and improve and be ready for, so that when school does start, if we end up having to move to that or start with that, that we're prepared to do so.
Thank you. And Scott, in District 93, how would our hybrid instruction sort of look?
Yeah, just like George, I'd say very similar discussions in our district, and not just in our district, but across the state. And so probably the only thing I'd add is, as we thought about why would we implement that type of schedule, really it would come down to if there are, again, health agency restrictions saying that we have to increase the amount of physical distancing that we can do, whether that's on school buses or in the classroom. That's probably the reason why we would have to go to that model. Otherwise, I think we'll just, again, try to stick with our primary plan, which is trying to bring as many kids back for regular instruction as we can.
Great. You've both talked at the beginning just about the incredible work that our teachers have done to try and switch to different mode of instruction with just a few days' notice. How do the different learning and teaching scenarios impact your teachers, Scott? What are some things that you've seen or heard from your teachers around that?
Yeah, each one of those certainly has a different impact for teachers, and I guess I'll start with the remote and instruction and learning at home. I think most of our teachers were grateful for the opportunity. A lot of them are young parents, whether fathers or mothers, and so it would have been somewhat challenging to have schools canceled and have now a child care issue for them. So I think they were all appreciative of the fact that they were able to work from home and deliver instruction to their kids remotely. That also certainly brings some challenges as well. And even with me, I was working from home quite a bit during that period, and I certainly don't feel like I was as effective as I am when I'm in the office and engaged face-to-face with people. But with that, our teachers faced a lot of the same challenges that our kids face. Some of them had limited internet connectivity, which made face-to-face meetings somewhat of a challenge. Even some of our teachers didn't necessarily have devices in their homes, and so we provided those. But when you now shift a teacher from their classroom and expect them to essentially fulfill those same functions from home without the same resources or tools, it's certainly a challenge. And then as we move up to the hybrid schedule, I think again we would face a lot of that same challenges if our teachers are expected to be teaching at school, but their own children happen to be home on that day. That's certainly going to create some unique challenges and barriers and obstacles that we'll have to work through with that. And one of the challenges as we look at getting back to school as normal is simply the teachers that have their own concerns about their own risk. They could be in an age category or a health category that puts them at risk. They may have family members that they feel are at risk, and so there's certainly this overwhelming concern from a few of our teachers that simply continuing their job as normal puts them or a loved one at risk. And so those are things that we'll need to continue to work through and talk with them. But overall, just from an instruction wise, I think our teachers adapted really well just to the instructional part, and it was just a lot of those other issues and challenges that they faced as we made that transition.
Okay. And George, in District 91, how would you say that the different sort of instructional modes kind of impact teachers? What are some things teachers have to do to kind of adapt from one to the other?
Well, what we found was there was a broad continuum with respect to the experience that teachers had with respect to utilizing digital tools and curriculum resources that they would access via the internet. In a lot of our schools, we have carts with devices on them, and so teachers could utilize those on a daily basis if that was the way that they chose to integrate the technology into the curriculum. And so we found that we had variations in terms of their comfort level and their proficiency with delivering instruction and engaging students digitally. So for some folks, it was really just expanding upon those things that they had done in the classroom previously, enhancing those. And for others, it was a bit of a lift. They had to learn how to do some things differently. And kind of going back to the first question with respect to lessons learned, we got quite a bit of feedback from parents that we needed to reduce the number of websites and learning management systems that they had to navigate. So if they had multiple kids in their household, attending different schools, they may have had, any number of platforms that they kind of had to learn how to navigate to help their kids with. So I think in terms of the challenge, and I would say that the teachers really stepped up and met the challenge, it was really figuring out how to do things that they had previously done face-to-face and then incorporating those into a remote scenario. So that's also something that we're focusing on going forward, is how do we identify those platforms, those apps, all of those kinds of things that are effective. We do know that there's some that are out there that were used that are maybe less than effective. Nobody likes grammar practice. So that's one app that we would probably discourage people from using in the future.
With education moving online or remote, digital, there was a lot of discussion across the country about the issue of a digital divide, this divide between students who had access to computers and devices and the internet and those who didn't. How big of an issue would you say that is in our community? What are some things your district did to address that during this latest closure, and are there things that you're looking to do in the fall just to try and support families and make sure that students have access to the materials that they need? And George, maybe if you want to start that with sort of a thought on District 91.
Initially, the challenge was really trying to communicate with families and find out what their needs were. And again, there was a broad continuum of what kind of devices they may have had in the home and what their level of connectivity was, if they had it at all. And time was not our friend as well because of where we were in terms of the school year. We worked with some different organizations like IBE to try and provide hotspots or ways for students whose families didn't have an internet connection to get connected. There were some instances, for example, we have a number of apartments that don't have connectivity that are close to Ralston Stadium, so we were able to actually kind of put a wireless signal up there that they could access. And then we distributed several thousand devices, Chromebooks. But one of the things we learned is that some people didn't want to have the devices, they didn't want to have the connectivity, that they preferred more of a paper pencil packet delivery kind of situation. So that digital divide takes a number of forms. It's not just about the ability to connect or having the devices. It's a number of things that are related to proficiency and using devices. Many of us are good consumers of technology, but in terms of having to utilize it to produce something, that's a whole different approach than being on social media or utilizing different apps. The other thing that we're looking at as we go forward is that there's some value in standardizing the devices that we use with different students, so that if they have a problem, the teachers are familiar with the device, that they're using the same device, so that we have some consistency across the board and are better able to support that. So that's something that we're looking at going into next year, that we do have a one-to-one environment where students have a device that they bring to school, they take it home, and so it becomes a little bit more ubiquitous in terms of integrating that into instructional practices.
And Scott, I know this was an issue that District 93 also addressed in various ways. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did in Bonneville?
Yeah, very similar. We knew, again, that at the base level, we needed to provide students with devices if they didn't have devices in the home, and then also to try to provide connectivity where they didn't have connectivity. So the first thing we did was contact our families and let them know that they could come and pick up a Chromebook. At first, we started with one per family, and then once we got that first wave out, then we let families come in and pick up another Chromebook or two. And just like George talked about, I think that was one of the keys, is that was the only device that we were sending out. We did have families using their own devices also to access the content and the curriculum and instruction, but by standardizing with Chromebooks, it made it much easier for us to support and help those families. And then close to that, we knew that once schools shut down, that we would have families that did not have access, didn't have connectivity to that. So we ordered hotspots. Unfortunately, I think across the country there were lots of schools doing the same thing, so it took us a couple weeks to get those in. We used some federal funding to do that, to specifically target families that, for example, that don't speak English in the home, or some other situations like that. And we were able to get out about 250 hotspots to get our families connected. And then close behind that, the state also created funding so we could put some outside radios into our parking lots at the places where we were delivering meals to students, and so they could come into our parking lots and access internet technology that way. So those were really the key things that we did, and just did a lot of reaching out, and had probably the most important thing in all of that is that our teachers were making personal contact with those families that were not connecting through those devices. So as they started online meetings with their classes, using Google Meet and through those Chromebooks, as they had students that were not showing up for those meets, then they were making personal phone calls, personal contacts. Our principals were following up and just trying to find out what happened to these kids, and then what could we do to reach out and bring those kids and get them the help and support that we needed. And through all that effort, I think they did a remarkable job, and I feel like we ended up somewhere around 98% of our kids that ended up connecting and were able to receive the instruction, which seems like a remarkably high number, but when you have 2% of your students and you have 13,000 kids in your district, that's 260 kids that we weren't able to connect with, that moved out of the area, or that simply wouldn't respond to those phone calls. And so those are the kids that we're really concerned about coming back in the fall, is what can we do to help meet them where they were when they basically weren't able to continue with their learning this spring.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge challenge. Absolutely. If you are able to come back in the fall, I mean, that's our goal. I think both districts are working toward that, as our districts across the state. It sounds like one of the things that parents are concerned about is just sort of some of the preventative things that you might be doing in schools to try and minimize the spread of the virus. Can you talk to us a little bit, Scott, about some of the things that you're looking at as far as cleaning and disinfecting, or other protocols that parents might expect to see in the fall?
Yeah, so as we've reviewed the guidance from the CDC, and I think that's pretty much everything that we've all become familiar with over the last few weeks, the key areas we need to look at are, one, the environmental factors, and again, things like regularly cleaning and sanitizing. Candidly, one of the areas that we weren't very focused on before all this were our shared Chromebooks, and like George talked about, we have these Chromebooks or computers that are in carts that get shared between classrooms. Had never really thought about the risk of transmitting diseases until this outbreak, and so we put in protocols so that those get cleaned after every use. Certainly working to make sure we've got hand sanitizer in our classrooms, and encouraging the frequent hand washing and doing those things, and our teachers will be working with our students to clean their desktops every day. So those are good things to do. As we met with Eastern Idaho Public Health actually this morning on our plan, they said those are good things to do, but the reality is this disease is mostly spread from person to person. That has to be the number one strategy we're focused on. And so we are looking to say, how can we accomplish as much physical distancing as possible in each of our school scenarios. On school buses, that's virtually impossible. We simply, with the number of students that we bus, we're busing 6,000 to 7,000 students every single day. We use about 70 buses to do that, and there's just no way to get any physical distancing on those school buses. And so there has to be a recognition on all of our parts that as we do resume school in the fall, that there will be some things that we simply can't put in the safeguards that we would like to put in because they just won't work. In our classrooms, we are looking to create as much space between desks as possible, but again, there are times where students will be grouped together and working face-to-face, and that's just part of instruction and learning and how our teachers are expected to teach. And so there will be an element of risk there. So we'll put in as much physical distancing as we possibly can, also recognizing the fact that we have to balance that against effective instruction and learning and the strategies that we expect our teachers to incorporate every day in their teaching.
And George, I would expect that in District 91, there's sort of similar protocols that you're looking at for cleaning and disinfecting, and then also that social distancing piece. That's especially challenging when you've got classrooms of kindergartners and first graders. But talk a little bit about some of those in District 91.
Similar to what Scott indicated with regard to the environmental pieces, trying to take care of those, and it might mean some changes in the way classrooms look. So we may have to put some beanbag chairs and some of the fabric covered furniture and things like that, so that we, number one, don't have to worry about sanitizing as many pieces of furniture and some that are more difficult to sanitize, but also creating more space in the classroom. So we're having discussions around that at this point in time. Transportation is a major concern because with all of these practices, really what we're attempting to do is to mitigate risk. And some things we'll be able to do more easily than others. And easy doesn't always correlate with effective. So there will be some challenges, and I think that assuming that we are able to start the school year coming back, that there'll be modifications as we get a better idea of how things are going to look and how kids are going to behave, quite honestly. Kindergartners like to hug their teachers, and they tend to be hands-on, and so there's impulse control and all of those kinds of things that will be challenging for us. But I think that's a part of the teaching that will have to occur, is the teaching of behaviors in terms of what students need to do to protect themselves and others, and that varies across grade levels. So there'll be that whole set of challenges associated with that. And then the other element of that is kind of the social emotional piece. We have kids that have been out of school for an extended period of time now. It'll be almost 6 months when they come back. And so a lot of the teaching of behaviors that we typically do, we will still need to do. And then on top of that, also have to be teaching them about things that they need to do to try and reduce their risk or the risk of them transmitting to others. So it'll be interesting, to say the least.
Absolutely. With the recent sort of increase in cases that we've seen across the state and also in eastern Idaho over the last week or so, it's there's a good sense that this will be with us in the fall. If we're able to start and as you sort of make your plans, what are some things you're thinking about as far as procedures that if a student or a staff member tests positive, kind of what you would do in those situations? And Scott, I'll have you take this question first.
Thank you. So again, we spent the morning, had about a 3-hour morning meeting this morning as we were working on our plan for the fall, and James Corbett from Eastern Idaho Public Health was there, and it was super helpful information as we talked about this issue. And from their perspective, typically what happens is if somebody's identified with the coronavirus, then they do contact tracing and they try to identify who has been in close proximity with that individual, so that they can notify them and begin a quarantine process. And so we had a lot of discussion about how much can we realistically limit students' interaction during a school day. And the conclusion we came to is really all we can do is control what happens at the classroom level. So inside of that classroom, it's not realistic that the student would only associate with 2 or 3 other students, and likely they're going to be associating, especially at the elementary level, with all 25 to 35 students that are in that classroom with them throughout the day. So knowing that, likely what would happen is if a student or a staff member was diagnosed with the coronavirus, then that classroom would likely have to be quarantined for the next 14 days, and that's where we would shift that individual classroom to an online instructional model.
Great. And in District 91, George, do you expect anything different? I know you've also been working closely with the Eastern Idaho Public Health.
Yeah, very similar procedures, protocols. You know, the one area that in addition to our students is staff. And so a lot of what we'll need to do is make sure that to the extent that we can, we're minimizing the ability or the probability of people becoming super spreaders. So, you know, a common practice, for example, right now might be during intervention time for reading, we might have a number of paraprofessionals that would work with various groups of kids. And so a practice that we might have to change would be that rather than having multiple people work within a classroom, we identify specific people that would be with that group of students all day or for the period of time that they would normally be there. But as Scott indicated, we'll follow the guidance from the Eastern Idaho District Health. They've been very collaborative, anxious to help out in any way that they can, and we appreciate their willingness to collaborate with us.
Great. As you finalize your plans and sort of, what are some ways that you share information with students, parents, teachers, the public in general? You've both talked a little bit about how important it's going to be for the community as a whole to work together to get ready for the fall. So, George, what are some ways that District 91 sort of shares information?
Well, we try to use as many vehicles as we can. Obviously, there are social media is one, posting information on Facebook, utilizing the district website with links to other information. We have a program called School Messenger that we encourage parents to sign up for so that we can send text messages out in addition to emails or in combination with those. Again, the thing that I think the parents were most appreciative of this spring were the personal contacts from teachers. So that's something that we'll continue to encourage. That's one of those best practices, is to make sure that we have communication at the classroom level between teachers and families, teachers and parents. So there's multiple layers to that, and then try and get those messages out in a timely manner, and so we kind of have the just-in-time communication in the event that families have to make adjustments, that they have as much lead time as we can provide them with.
Scott, is there anything you'd add on that?
No, we typically use the same ones. I think one of the more effective things we did this last spring is with Facebook. We did some Facebook Live meetings very similar to this one, gave our patrons a chance to send questions in through Facebook that we could answer right there for them, and that was helpful because we can have a lot of discussions among ourselves on what we think people need to know, and sometimes miss the boat. And so I just appreciated that opportunity to have those conversations with our families at home and be able to answer their questions directly.
Well, and in line with that, we did get a question posted online about masks and sort of what we're thinking as far as masks. I wonder if, Scott, maybe you'd be comfortable
Sure.
addressing that.
Yeah. Had a lot of discussion this morning about masks as well. And let me maybe take one step back. Probably one of the most useful things that James Corbett from Eastern Idaho Public Health shared with us this morning is the very best thing we can all do to help stop the spread of the disease is simply to stay home when we're sick. And so that's one thing that we'll continue to emphasize with our students and with our staff members is if you are showing those symptoms that are consistent with this virus or the flu, including a fever, persistent coughing, and those real telltale indicators, we really need them to stay home. And as more people follow that, then that's probably the very most effective thing we can do to combat this. So moving from there, as we talked about masks, there's no question that masks would have a substantial obstruction with typical delivery of instruction with from our teachers to our students. They just don't make it easy to communicate. I'm obviously not wearing one now because I know I'm not very clear as it is, but I'd be even less clear if I were wearing a mask right now. So, but we did talk about there may be times that as student and teachers are in more close proximity to each other, that might be an appropriate time that a teacher may want to wear a mask. We are going to encourage students to wear masks, but we don't have the means to provide masks to all of our students, and so we're really going to leave that as a family decision and encourage them to use them as appropriate. But typically what happens is if we don't wear masks the right way, if we're continually adjusting the masks, if we're touching the masks, if we're moving them up and down, then we've really minimized their effectiveness altogether. And so in some cases, they don't accomplish what they're intended to simply because they're kind of a nuisance.
Anything you'd add to that, George?
Some of the same concerns have surfaced in our conversations. We've looked at some alternatives, particularly for staff that may, have a family member that has, is health compromised, something like that. Looking at more of the clear shields. There are some that almost like a welding helmet. There's a headset and then a shield that comes down. A lot of the healthcare workers are wearing those. We're also seeing now on the market masks that are more clear shields that go around the ears and then come up. They don't go up and cover the nose, but at least they cover the mouth. It's important for kids, particularly as they're learning how to read, to be able to see the teacher's mouth. And so in some instances, it's important that kids have that visibility. But certainly, we would encourage the use of those where people are comfortable. It's I think, the best example of there are things that we can do to mitigate the risk, and some will be more effective than others. Hopefully, when we come back to school, we'll be able to work with people to understand that if someone's wearing a mask, that's okay, and if they're not, that's okay too. That it doesn't become an issue that's divisive or political or becomes a catalyst for bullying and name calling and those kinds of things. So there's that other element to it besides the mitigation of risk.
Okay. This has been a very unsettling time on so many different fronts. I mean, the school closures across the country have just been unprecedented. What would you say to community members, parents, about the future of education, George?
When people think about going back to school as we have normally, I don't think that the normal that we have experienced over the last few years will continue to exist. There will be some things that will be integrated into public education as a result of this that will be shown to be beneficial, that we would want to continue. We have had instances over the course of my career where schools have closed because of high absenteeism due to the flu season, for example. So some of the practices that are really being emphasized, I think, will continue. I think that in some cases people are finding that there are modalities of learning, teaching and learning that work better for some students than for others. And so, as I said earlier, I think this is not something that's just going to be this fall. It's going to be with us probably for a year or more. And so as we implement different strategies to deal with that, I see a shift from kind of trying to address groups of students really to more individualized types of instruction, because people will have more access to different ways of teaching and learning, and have the opportunity to be maybe a little bit more selective in terms of identifying those modalities that work best for them. So I don't see us just going back to where we were before, that some of the changes that will be implemented as a result of this will be identified as something that we would want to continue. And there may be some practices that we've done in the past that will fall off, and we won't be doing those anymore. So I think there's a high probability that going forward, school's going to look different than it has previously.
Scott, you've been in education for a long time, served lots of different roles. What do you think about when you think about the future of education?
Well, I fundamentally believe that in public schools and in the purpose that they serve in our communities and in our state and in our country, and at the same time, like George talked about, this situation has certainly made us take a step back and reevaluate what really matters the most, what is the most essential, and how do we make sure that we deliver on our promise to on those essentials for all students, and maybe let go of some of the things that aren't nearly as essential or aren't as important. So I think for me, that's what this experience has really been valuable for, is just to take a step back from things and think about what really matters the most and what are the things we can get by without doing. That being said, at the very heart of that, from the dawn of time until now, when you think about instruction and learning, it takes a teacher and a student. And I don't think we'll ever be in a place where we'll see anything that's more effective in helping students learn than to have a highly effective teacher that's teaching those kids. And so as easy as it is sometimes to deliver content to students online and to get them everything that they should learn, the teacher is just such a critical part of that. And so we need to continue to invest in our teachers. We need to continue to attract and recruit highly effective teachers. And the truth is, we need more people stepping up and saying, hey, I want to be a teacher to make a difference and for us to continue schools the way that we have. So at the heart of it, that's to me is really what it comes down to, is how do we continue to improve the effectiveness of our teachers and help our students have better access to highly effective teachers in the classroom.
Great. And for the community as a whole, as you finalize your plans, as you get ready to bring students back in the fall, what is the one thing you would say, Scott, that the community can do to help your effort?
Yeah. To me, I think it's just taking a step back and realizing that we're all in this together, and it will take a community-wide effort, not just for school to resume, but for our communities to resume as normal. And I do think there's key things that we can all do to make that a reality. And just like I talked about earlier, one of those key things is recognizing then when we're not feeling well, the best thing we can do is to stay home. And I've got to take my own advice on that. I was raised in a home where one way or the other you got your butt to work, and we kind of have to take a step back from that mentality and say the best thing we can do for our community is to stay home when we're not feeling well, keep our kids home, make those personal sacrifices to keep our community safe and healthy.
I think that's going to be key. It is going to be a big shift for a lot of people. George, is there anything you would add that the community can do to help?
Well, I think one thing would be to be patient and receptive to some things that might look a little bit different than what they have in the past, to kind of give change an opportunity to happen, and again, be patient with that. There may be some things that come out of this that have been ingrained for a long, long period of time, that it's an opportunity to change those. The traditional school calendar might be an example. A number of colleges and universities are starting earlier, finishing before Thanksgiving, and then taking a break during that period of time, kind of the typical flu season, and coming back in January. And so it may be that a part of this process that we're going through would be an evolution in changes to the school calendar, where we look at different models rather than the kind of the agrarian calendar that we're on now with a big break in the summertime. That it may be that schools are out of session in July and in the wintertime for a month or 6 weeks or something like that. that we structure those calendars more around what makes sense from a teaching learning standpoint and kind of a health perspective rather than an old agrarian calendar that really has no rhyme or reason with respect to teaching and learning at this point. So again, I would reiterate just kind of patience and a willingness to give some things a try.
That's great. Thank you. Well, we really appreciate all that you're doing to support our families and get ready for the fall. I'd encourage parents, patrons from both districts to, watch district websites, news feeds, Facebook, to kind of stay abreast with what the districts have planned. And with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Mike.
Well, thank you all for tuning in today to our program. I think it was really insightful. I want to congratulate our scholarship winners and our club members for supporting education and literacy. George and Scott, I want to thank you for what you do every day to lead education in our community. And please express our thanks to your staff on behalf of the community and our local Rotary Club for what they've done to keep education going during this unusual time, and what they will do as we all move forward together, and to keep everybody healthy and learning, because that's what the new next will look like. So with that, thank you for tuning in, and we're adjourned.